Dean Baker of the Center for Economic and Policy Research says, quote, at some point, the pain of high unemployment across the country may lead to some new thinking in Washington, but until that time, welcome to the second depression. When you hear those kinds of comments, when you see the data that so many Americans still don't believe that we are in an economic recovery, how do you respond?
Well, you know, that sounds like a way overstatement. The last 6 months, the private sector added 1 million jobs. That's a heavy contrast, in my view, to when we first come into office at the deepest depths, worst recessions in 1929, and we're losing 750,000 jobs every month. So I think we've come a long way from that spot, and we are in a different environment than the rescue phase. We're now in a phase where what we should be doing is putting a focus on job creation and growth through the private sector. The things that government can do to facilitate the private sector standing up and creating these jobs going forward. Now, that doesn't put us on the edge of whatever Mr. Baker said, and he's a nice guy, and I know him. I just disagree with him. We're not on the edge of a depression or anything like that. We had some stiff headwinds at the beginning of this year, but most private forecasters and the Fed are expecting a comeback in the second half of the year.
Jamie Dimon, one of the most powerful figures on Wall Street, heads Chase. He said that part of the problem with the recovery could very well be too many government regulations, in terms of too many restrictions on Wall Street. Are Americans going to be happy to hear a banker who they helped bail out folks that created this big problem say there are too many restrictions on banks? Do you think there are too many, or should there be more regulation of banks to avert the crisis that we saw just a few years ago?
Well, you know, it's not my place to decide what the American people will think of what they hear people saying. I will say the ripping up the rules of the road and getting rid of regulations on the financial industry was not good for the economy, and it wasn't good for the financial industry either. It led to the worst financial crisis in most all of our lifetimes. So the regulatory apparatus that we put in place to put and reestablish rules of the road on financial institutions, to establish a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and things of that nature, I think are really important. And in the long run, I think they can be good for Wall Street and financial institutions because they reestablish public trust in those banks and other financial companies. Now, I don't fault anybody. Look, somebody's business, you know, if it's in their own short-run business interest, of course they're going to speak up for that. I think we understand that. But we've passed a financial regulatory reform, and we ought to carry that out as the law requires us to.